So let's go back to what happens if we have an actual fertilization achieved. So we develop this mature ovum in the ovary, and it bursts out during ovulation, and it gets swept into the uterine tube by the fimbriae in the cilia. Fertilization occurs in the uterine tube. In order to fertilize the egg, the sperm has to get through the zona pellucida. Remember that protective layer around the actual oocyte. That's where the acrosome is important. Remember, the acrosome in the tip of the sperm contained a lot of enzymes that the sperm will release against the zona pellucida of the ovum, and that will help to break down the zona pellucida so that the sperm can get in. Another important thing that happens is once the sperm penetrates the cell membrane and gets into the egg, into the ovum, then there's a reaction that prevents any other sperm from being able to get through. And this is very important because an egg fertilized by one sperm is a zygote that can grow and become offspring. An egg fertilized by two sperm is not viable and will die right away. So the sperm joins with the egg to form our two-end zygote. That zygote begins moving along the uterine tube, and as it's moving, it's dividing. It divides by mitosis into two cells, and those two cells into four, those four cells into eight, those 8 into 16, etc., until we finally get to a stage called the morula. The morula is just a ball of cells. Now these cells are undifferentiated, which means none of them have decided what they're going to be. They could be anything. And in fact, once we reach the morula stage, they begin figuring out what they're going to do. The morula begins to rearrange to form a blastocyst, which is a hollow ball of cells. The blastocyst is the stage that actually implants in the uterus. And there are two parts of a blastocyst. The inner part of the blastocyst is a little ball of cells called the embryoblast. The embryoblasts are the ball of cells that will actually make the embryo. The outer layer of cells is called the trophoblast. The outer layer of cells is what touches the lining of the uterus and becomes part of the placenta, and it's also the trophoblast that produces the human chorionic gonadotropin that's so necessary to maintain the pregnancy. When the blastocyst implants, the cells in the embryoblast begin differentiating into 3 layers. We form 3 layers of cells in the embryoblast. These 3 layers are important because they will begin to form the body systems of the developing offspring. The ectoderm, or the outer layer, is what forms the epidermis and the nervous system. The mesoderm, or middle layer, is what forms the skeletal system and a lot of the muscles. And then finally, the endoderm, or the inner layer, is what will form the mucosa of the digestive and respiratory tracts. And then the other parts come from various combinations of these 3 tissue layers. From the point of conception, where we actually had fertilization and joined the sperm and egg together, to the point where we form the 3 layers, we don't technically even have an embryo yet. That's all considered the pre-embryo stage. Once the 3 layers are formed, then we have an embryo. The embryo stage lasts from about day 16 to about week 8, and that's going to be 8 weeks after the last menstrual period. During the embryo stage, the organ systems are forming. So an embryo starts with just those 3 layers of tissue, and then within a matter of weeks, it's gone from 3 layers of tissue into a fully developed embryo that has all of the body systems. By the end of the embryo stage, all of the body systems have formed. They may not be fully functional, and the embryo certainly can't exist outside the uterus yet, but all the body systems are in place. The eyes, the ears, the brain, the gut, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the other accessory organs, all of the organs have formed, even though they're not mature yet. Once all of the organs have formed at the end of the embryo stage, which is again at about week 8 of a pregnancy, then we enter the fetal stage. The fetus grows and develops and matures all of those organs. This takes from week 8 to about week 40. 40 weeks is the typical length of time from the last menstrual period until a woman actually gives birth. During all of this time, The placenta is very important for keeping the developing embryo or fetus alive. The placenta is important because it takes the nutrients from the mother's blood and oxygen from the mother's blood and sends them through the umbilical cord into the baby, so the baby has nutrient-rich oxygenated blood. It also removes wastes and CO2 from the baby's blood and puts them back into the mother's blood to be removed from her system. The placenta also can help transport antibodies from the mother's body into the baby's body. This will be very important when the baby's actually born, because the baby won't have been exposed to any antigens, so it won't have any of its own antibodies. The antibodies from the mother's body are what provide a lot of protection for the baby against pathogens when it's first born. Another important function of the placenta is it forms as a barrier between the mother's blood and the baby's blood. This is important to keep the mother from being exposed to the baby's antigens. Remember, the baby does not have the same cell identity markers as the mother. If the mother is exposed to the baby's cells directly, then the mother's immune system will create antibodies that can attack the baby's cells. And as we saw already, those antibodies could be transmitted through the placenta to the baby and destroy it. The placenta also secretes a lot of very important hormones. The placenta secretes the estrogens, progesterones, human chorionic gonadotropin, and other hormones that are important not only for preserving the pregnancy so you don't have a miscarriage or a stillbirth, but also for the development of the fetus and for the development of some of the maternal tissues, things like the mammary glands. Once the baby's actually reached full term, then the process of labor begins with a whole other set of hormones that we don't need to go into that stimulate the contraction of the uterus, and the contractions of the uterus help to push the baby out. And then once it's born, it depends on milk from the breasts for its earliest nutrition and development.